Welcome, everyone, to the Marketplace of Ideas, third Thursday. Today's episode features include Art Carden, where he's going to talk about how, will you share how you're going to
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about the book that Deirdre McCloskey and I have written called Leave Me Alone and I'll Make You Rich, How the Bourgeois Deal Enriched the World, available in paperback as of this past November, and probably a handful of other things I have going on that are building on this project.
Okay, this
understanding,
is good. Thank you.
Why the rest got rich.
Okay, this is going to be wonderful. I'm excited to have you here, and thank you. Today, as you know, I'm Tawni and I'm broadcasting out of Lindenwood University in St. Charles, a part of the greater St. Louis area.
And I'm Kate Johnson. I'm coming to you from West Virginia University in Morgantown, West Virginia.
We're getting together to explore sound educational materials and programs in the humanities and social sciences.
And we hope meetings like today will continue to help you identify great resources. And as we connect with everyone outside of formal channels and conferences, share ideas on how we can make these third Thursday calls continue to serve the community. Our goal is to make our shared passion for better learning opportunities a reality.
Okay, great. Before I turn things over to Kate to formally introduce Art, I just want to go over a few housekeeping items. As we know, today's session will be recorded and posted on our LinkedIn group. To join our LinkedIn group, just connect with Kate or me, and we will give you access or ask you to join us on LinkedIn. As you know, some of our past speakers include John Stossel, Phil Magnus, Jason Clemens, as well as Scott Niederjohn. So we ask you to mark your calendars. Our next third Thursday is going to be superseded by the upcoming APPY meetings in Cancun, where Kate will host a cocktail party. If you want to be invited, put your name in the chat. So, Kate, will you please introduce Art?
Oh, absolutely. So today we welcome Dr. Art Carden. He's a professor of economics at Samford University's Brock School of Business. His first book is co-authored with the esteemed Deirdre McCloskey. He will present some of the highlights from Leave Me Alone and I'll Make You Rich, How the Bourgeois Deal Enriched the World. But before we turn that discussion over to Art, let me share a little of his background. So Art earned his bachelor's degree in economics from the University of Alabama, and later he received his PhD from the Washington University in economics. He serves on a variety of fellow positions, for instance, at the American Institute for Economic Research, the Institute for Faith Work in Economics, and the Independent Institute. He publishes scholarly journals, for instance, Business Ethics Quarterly, the Journal of Urban Economics Applied, Econ, Public Choice, and Contemporary Economic Policy. He is well known by media correspondence and occasionally contributes commentaries and other articles, Forbes, Productive, and USA Today. So, Art?
Thank you so much. It is fantastic to be here. Right now, I don't have access to the chat, so if someone could drop my name in the chat for an invitation to the APPY cocktail party, I would greatly appreciate it. I look forward to that. It's going to be a really good time. And I've been asked to talk for a couple of minutes about, again, like I mentioned, the book that Deirdre McCloskey and I wrote, Leave Me Alone and I'll Make You Rich, How the Bourgeois Deal Enriched the World. And I'm also going to use that as a bit of a jumping off point for a handful of other things that are sort of in progress right now. A few books that are on the horizon that I hope will help people with introductory economics, and in particular, people at universities like my own, say, that have a very, very strong Christian mission, where people want to look at and explore that intersection with our beloved dismal science. So yeah, I earned my PhD from Washington University in St. Louis, same as Tawni, back in 2006. And that's where I kind of first really started getting to know Deirdre McCloskey. I picked her up at the airport for a talk she was giving at WashU. What was that? The week before my dissertation proposal, actually. I told her I'd read the entirety of the manuscript of her first book on the bourgeois era, The Bourgeois Virtues, Ethics for an Age of Commerce. She called this ambitious, and I guess it was. And then in 2012, we had lunch together at a thing in Chicago, and she said, hey, I want to write this book that kind of condenses and summarizes and expands on her very, very big project on what she calls the bourgeois era. Would you like to be the co-author? And whenever a scholar McCloskey stature says, would you like to work on this project with me? The correct answer is yes. Whatever mountain I need to move, I will move so that I can make this happen. And the book came out in 2020. And it has, I think, a really interesting and useful and hopeful message about the world we live in and about the future of that world we live in. But before we kind of really dig into that,
I'm going to have you scoot over
Sure.
here.
Oh,
For
okay.
some reason, the owl is not catching you.
Okay.
And there you go. So go ahead and move
okay.
really fast. It should be catching you.
Oh, okay, awesome. Okay, so now the owl's catching me. Okay, good.
Okay.
I kind of want to begin with a bit of a thought experiment. This is something that occurred to me over the summer. I was wondering if one of your ancient ancestors from the British Isles or Africa or Asia or wherever your ancient ancestors happen to be from, if they were to show up on your front porch and you wanted to show them how very radically different your life is from theirs, where would you take them? And I thought about it for a bit, and the answer I actually came up with was, while I was walking around in a Walmart supercenter, a Walmart supercenter. And the reason for this, well, there are actually several reasons for this. One is just the sheer abundance and variety of goods that are available. Office supplies, clothing, food, electronics, you name it, available in unbelievable variety and at prices that mean that we can get things like bread for very, 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 very little in terms of the time we have to spend and the sweat of our brow. But the thing that really would impress me the most, or the thing that would really, I think, nail the message for our ancient ancestors showing up on our doorstep and trying to figure out why their life is so much different, or why our lives are so very different, is the clientele at Walmart. And if you look around at Walmart, there's an entire website called peopleofwalmart.com that you should, under no circumstances whatsoever, actually look up. It's dedicated to basically making fun of the Walmart clientele and the kind of people perhaps you see at Walmart. And one of the reasons for this is because Walmart's clientele is not the upper crust. It's not gods and kings. It's not it's not political leaders. It's not the 1%. It's not even the party, like the upper level members of the party who would get to shop in special stores in the former Eastern Bloc or the former Soviet Union or places like that. It's people of relatively modest means, lower class, lower middle class, middle class, some upper middle class, but people of relatively modest means, descended from people of even more modest means, who have access to goods that their ancestors could not have imagined in unbelievable quantities at very, very, very low prices. And I think that really kind of illustrates the big difference between the world we live in and the world our ancestors inhabited. The world our ancestors inhabited was, in a lot of ways, quite literally a Hobbesian nightmare. Life was solitary, life was poor, life was brutish. Life was solitary, life was poor, life was nasty. That's what I'd forgotten. Life was brutish, and life was short. You barely got to see anybody. You maybe went 50 miles from your village at most. Life was solitary. Per capita income was $3, maybe $4 a day. I spent more on this cup of coffee just a little bit ago than probably one of our ancient ancestors would have been able to spend on all of their food, clothing, and shelter for a day. Life was nasty. You were probably crawling with vermin. Everyone you knew was crawling with vermin. You're probably having to shave your head regularly to get rid of lice. You're probably just covered in dirt and fecal matter, and maybe you got to bathe, maybe ever. Okay, life was solitary, life was poor, life was brutish. Life was nasty. Life was brutish, in that the probability you died at the hands of another human being was much, much higher than it is now, and life was short. Life expectancy was, I think, 40 in countries like England and France at about the turn of the 19th century. Now it's 60 in countries like Nigeria, which are among the poorest places on earth. And so what McCloskey and I are trying to do in the book is explain exactly why this happened. How did we get from a world where there was hardly anybody and they were almost all living lives that were solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short, to a world where we have over 8 billion people living at historically unprecedented standards of living and for unprecedentedly long periods of time. And so what we do is we do kind of as McCloskey did in her 3-volume series on what she calls the bourgeois era. We go through a handful of different explanations for it, and we show, or at least summarize the literature suggesting what it wasn't And then we offer our explanation for what we think it was. What it wasn't was a lot of good things. What it wasn't was a lot of bad things. So for example, one of the things that does not explain the great enrichment in its entirety is saving. And like I tell my students when I talk to them about this, I say, I'm going to sound like your parents for just a second. And it's weird that like I'm finally old enough to be my kids, like be like my student's dad and not be that weird. Yeah, like that really kind of creeps me out. But I'm going to sound like your parents for just a second. You should save more. You should invest more. Everybody should save more. But increases in saving, we argue, don't explain the increase in the nature and causes of the wealth of nations, because merely piling up capital goods doesn't really do a whole lot for us. In his 2010 book, The Rational Optimist, Matt Ridley offers a really fascinating example where he talks about ancient hand axes that our ancestors used to, one, to kill things, and the two, once they killed things, to cut them up. So you have like this little thing, it's roughly the size of your hand, it's a really sharp edge, use it to scrape fat out of hides and cut through meat and all sorts of other stuff. And Ridley points out that our ancient ancestors used these for something like 1 million years without the technology changing. The other thing that he uses as an example is, I'm going to borrow Tawni's for just a second, is a computer mouse. And Ridley argues that these are roughly the same size. They fit the hand in much the same way, but they're fundamentally different in terms of their ability to generate finished goods and services. The action in terms of long-run economic growth is not piling up more of these little stone axes. An axe is kind of a strong word to use for them. They're basically just glorified stone knives. Economic growth doesn't come from piling up more and more and more of those, but it comes from coming up with new ideas that are eventually embodied in things like computer mice and remote speakers and Zoom and all of the other stuff that makes for the lives that we live now. So we don't think it was saving. Saving was nice. We should do more of it. Per capita income would almost certainly be higher if we did, but it doesn't explain a 1,500 or 1,600 or 2,000 percentage point increase in standards of living, which is what we're really interested in. It wasn't saving. It also wasn't, we argue, science. Though again, we think that science is really important. We think we should have more of it. Science is fascinating. And there are a lot of scientific innovations that sit at the basis of a lot of the things, the goods, the services, the healthcare, and things like that we enjoy today. But for the better part of history, technology tended to lead science. Technology tended to lead science. We would start doing something, and then only later would we figure out how it worked. For example, people were baking bread and brewing beer long before they understood the chemistry of baking bread and brewing beer. An analogy I use with my students sometimes is if you watch, there's a little show called Sports Science that you can find clips of it on YouTube, and it's really fascinating. And it'll show stuff like Lionel Messi running down the field to score a goal. And it'll talk about all the physics and everything that's going on as Lionel Messi is doing this. And it's absolutely fascinating. Okay. The thing is, Lionel Messi is probably not thinking about the physics that are going on underneath that. And moreover, Lionel Messi doesn't need to know the physics in order to be possibly the greatest soccer player of all time. He does it, then eventually we've kind of figured out why it worked. Basic science is wonderful. Basic science is probably something we should have more of, but basic science doesn't explain, again, like I said, a 1,500, 1,600, 2,000 percentage point increase in standards of living over time. Now, the really popular one nowadays is some variation on or variety of exploitation. We probably all heard this story. We probably all encountered this story. It's becoming increasingly popular for people to claim that the West is rich because our ancestors took stuff from the rest. Our ancestors enslaved, our ancestors colonized, our ancestors dominated via imperialism, our ancestors accumulated or extracted from the people that they dominated a primitive accumulation that sort of set going the capitalist mode of production, and now we have very high standards of living. And this is an emotionally compelling story, but it's economically wrong for a handful of reasons. The first is it just kind of doesn't really make a whole lot of sense in theory. Exploiting people is really expensive. And while it might make some people richer in the short run, it's not likely to do a whole lot for their descendants. It might do a lot for the descendants of the specific person who did the exploiting, but it's not necessarily going to do much for the descendants of the other people in the society who probably didn't really have a whole lot to do with any of that exploitation. So in theory, it's a little bit questionable. Second, empirically, it's a little bit questionable. If slavery, imperialism, and colonialism could explain the Great Enrichment, then the Great Enrichment would have happened a really long time ago somewhere else. Because if there's anything that is common to the human experience, it's humans being absolutely horrible to other humans. It's enslavement, it's colonization, it's imperialism. These things have existed for as long as there have been people. Yet it wasn't until the 18th and 19th centuries that we got a Great Enrichment. If the slave trade could have done it, or if a slave trade could have done it, then it would have happened perhaps somewhere along the Indian Ocean. It would have happened in ancient China or ancient Rome or ancient Greece, or indeed in a lot of parts of ancient Africa, or a lot of parts of the ancient Americas. The fact that it didn't suggests that slavery, imperialism, colonialism, and these types of domination are not the root of modern prosperity. The way that historian Neil Ferguson put it is that he said that imperialism was the least original thing Europeans did after 1492, because that's something that people have always been doing. And again, McCloskey and I argue, and we think the evidence is pretty compelling, that exploitation, while it might have made people like Cecil Rhodes very rich, or people like King Leopold very rich, or people like Queen Victoria very rich, or it might have allowed the crowned heads of Europe to have these beautiful and ornate literal crowns made out of stuff they stole from other places. It didn't really do much for the average person in England or France or Portugal or Spain or any of these imperial powers. And if anything, we are poorer today because some of our ancestors cut short the lives of so many people who came before us. What McCloskey and I think it is an equality of permission, which is a phrase that Deirdre's used in a couple of talks she gave at Stanford recently, and that I really, really like. It's liberty and dignity for innovators and entrepreneurs, making it so that we embrace people who come up with new ideas. We honor people who try new things. And furthermore, and most importantly, we don't expect them to ask permission in order to venture forth on some new idea that they have. So I'll close with an example from some work that I've done recently on the kind of entrepreneurial history of retail. So I've written a lot of papers about Walmart and its effects on various things. And earlier this year, or late last year, I had a paper published in Essays in Economic and Business History with a couple of co-authors on a guy named Saul Price and Sam Walton. Sam Walton, probably everybody knows. Saul Price is not exactly a household name. He's the guy for whom the School of Public Policy at USC is named. But he was a retail innovator who, it's not too much of a stretch to say, probably gave Walton a lot of his really good ideas. To make a long story short, Saul Price in the 1950s was doing legal work in San Diego. Via a real estate transaction, he ended up in possession of a warehouse. And he went with some of his clients from San Diego to Los Angeles to visit a store called Fedco, where some of his clients were doing business. And Fedco sold only to federal employees. And Price and his friends noticed that there are a lot of people who are making this long trip from San Diego to Los Angeles just to shop at Fedco. They said, hey, maybe that would work in San Diego. They asked if they could do business with Fedco. And Fedco said, yeah, no, we don't really want to, we don't want you to open a Fedco in San Diego. It'll probably work. Apparently, as I read this morning, in fact, actually, I think Saul Price had some other people come down. They said, yeah, sure, it'll probably work here, but we don't want to work with you. So what Saul Price did is he started a company that he called FedMart. And FedMart made him a multimillionaire. Eventually, he was forced out of his own company, and he and his son started a new enterprise called Price Club. Okay, Price Club was the first of the modern warehouse membership warehouse clubs. And it was a roaring success, again, primarily in the West. In the early 1980s, a guy named Jeffrey Brotman in Seattle contacted Price Club and said, hey, you know what would be great? It would be awesome if we had a Price Club in Seattle. And Price Club said, yeah, we're really not interested in expanding to Seattle right now. So what Jeffrey Brotman did is he brought on Saul Price's right-hand man, hired him away from Price Club, and they started a little store called Costco. About 10 years after that, Costco and Price Club merged, and Costco is now at the forefront of creative destruction in retail. One of the reasons that this happened, and one of the reasons we're able to enjoy these higher standards of living, is because the people at Fedco could not veto Saul Price's idea to start something like that in San Diego. And then furthermore, when Price Club said no thank you to Jeffrey Brotman when he asked if he could open a store in Seattle, he was free to hire Jim Senegal, Saul Price's right-hand man, start his own enterprise called Costco, and then eventually absorb Price Club and become one of the world's leading and largest retailers. So if I understand correctly, I had about 20 minutes or so, and I think that is and has been about 20 minutes. Happy to answer any questions people have about this project or a number of other things that are coming up that you'll want to make sure that you add to your Amazon wish list when they first appear. One is actually going to be published by the Libertarian Christian Institute later this year. It's a book called Strangers with Candy, Observations from the Ordinary Business of Life. That I think it's basically a collection of a lot of articles and things I've written for AIER that have been edited and revised and things like that. That again, I think a lot of folks in this network would find interesting and useful. So happy again to answer any questions that you have. I'm going to turn it over to Cate and Tawni, and either continue staring at the little owl or go off screen or whatever you guys want me to do.
Yeah, do we have any questions? Okay,
go
ahead.
Sorry, Art. So this book is really accessible to the younger audiences. Do you have a deal for classroom sets or anything like that, or high school?
I'm sorry.
Do you have classroom sets, or do you have supporting materials, supplements?
Unfortunately, we don't have supplementary materials, really. That's actually a really great idea, and something I should probably, when I go off camera, I should probably scribble about a little bit. I know that if you can order them in bulk from the University of Chicago Press, I think at a certain quantity, they'll give you like a 25% discount or something to that effect. But yeah, I do travel. And but that's kind of as close as we get right now to kind of classroom supplements. But yeah, that's a really good idea.
Hey,
It's something
Cate,
we should be doing.
while I prepare the introduction, our next section, if you'd pop that in the chat, that would be great. The name of the book and how people can order it.
Oh, sure. I'll do that.
That'd be fantastic. Okay, any other questions, thoughts, concerns? Okay, we're going to move on into the next subject, and that's AI in the classroom. And we're going to continue the conversation about the intersection of economics, teaching and learning, and research. We started with a conversation in January. Cate was responding to some of the things that were going on. I've had an interesting experience in my classroom that I'd like to share. But first, what I would like to do is thank Derek and Jadrian for being here with us today. Derek did an amazing job at the National Association of Economic Educators Professional Conference. He and Joel talked about AI, how to use it in the network. And then I'll let Jadrian talk about the article that's coming out that's forward thinking that he wrote with Dirk and Wayne. And is there another author on that paper, Jadrian? Who is it? Can go ahead. Oh, you need to unmute yourself. That's okay.
There we go. It's Nahil, but he's in Australia, so it's a completely different time zone for him.
Okay, and it's been retitled, right? Is ChatGPT has mastered the principle of economics. Now what?
Yes.
And so I think, yeah, it's under expedited review at the American Economist, which I think is tremendously exciting. So before we go into that article, and this is something that Cate and I are hopeful that we will do in the future, is we're going to actually share some readings so we can go back to the more conversational field that we had about a year ago, where we're talking about these ideas. I'd like Derek, if he would please, to just kind of give us some of the highlights from his NIE presentation, because I thought it was beautifully done and executed. Then we can move to Jadrian, who can chat a little bit about the article. And then I would like to turn to all of you at the end of this and talk about some of your experiences. And if I may, I'd like to highlight what just happened in my macroeconomics course with the use of the Chat GPT. And yeah, it's interesting on how it's challenging us. So first I'll turn it over to Derek. Derek will be followed by Jadrian. I'll highlight some of my experiences. And then all of you, if you would share some of your experiences and concerns, that'd be great, because at the end of this, we're hoping to have some type of research set out on this that talks about AI in the classrooms, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So Derek, why don't you take it away from here? And if you would just provide us a brief title and some of your background.
All right, I'm going to share the screen here for a minute, and I will do two things at one time here, try to two birds with one stone. So just give me 1 second here.
You can say wherever you want.
All right, so hopefully everybody can see my screen, and I'll do my introduction here.
For his use of tech.
Oops, sorry.
Thank you, Tawni. Derek D'Angelo is the Curriculum Development Director for the Foundation on Economic Education. Prior to joining the Foundation for Economic Education, Derek served his community as an AP Economics teacher in Michigan for 24 years. Looking to scale his desire to help others.
Oh, that's enough about me, right? Let's talk a little bit about what we did here and what's going on. And I think, you know, my view on AI is it's like a calculator. You can't stop it. It's here. Let's embrace it as a creative tool. Yeah, it's going to do some wacky things, and yes, students are going to use it to copy. They were copying before it came about anyway. At least they were in my classroom before I was retired a year and a half ago. So I look at it, how can we utilize this tool as a creative force? That's what I enjoy with it, like what I just did with having Janet Yellen's voice introduce me. It's a nice little tool. This is 11labs.io. It's a speech synthesis AI. And what you can do is load up 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes of somebody's audio. And I've got Janet Yellen's in here. I've got Greenspan. I've got Jerome Powell, because we were doing a thing at the Fed a couple of weeks ago. So we use some former Fed chairman, and then you can type in whatever you want for the text and then hit generate. And so it really just takes a couple minutes once you have the audio loaded up. And it's pretty easy to get, you know, that chunk of audio from, you know, anything out there on YouTube and just rip the audio off and pour it into this tool. So I think about the creative uses for that, how you could maybe a kid who doesn't like to speak publicly could, you know, put his paper into here and have somebody famous give a speech about them, or any type of biography. A lot of interesting uses with the speech synthesis software. Obviously, the first thing that we did in our I'm going to stop sharing screen here for a sec. The first thing that we did in our presentation was to ask the participants if they could choose between two different sections. One was ChatGPT created response, and then the other one was a Fred blog from the Federal Reserve economic data. And we asked the people that were council presidents, Federal Reserve people in the audience, which one was which, and it was 50-50 on all of the ones we asked. People could not figure out which one was ChatGPT and which one was the Federal Reserve economic data. Just based upon, you know, women in the sports industry, did Title IX make a difference? So we basically just put that prompt into ChatGPT. And so that was a little bit surprising that people were so split that they could not figure that out. And then we broke up into a couple different activities. And one of the first activities we did was, okay, let's match the response to the prompt. Again, how can we use this as a critical thinking tool? So they had to look and try to match the response to the prompt. And then we had one distractor that didn't match with anything. It made it a little bit more challenging. The second part of the activity was where we gave them some responses from ChatGPT and then had them engineer a prompt. what prompt might have, spewed out this response. And I think that does provide an ability for students to critically think, and there are already jobs out there for prompt engineering. I think that's one of the big things is how can you utilize this tool to really be powerful in that way by telling it what to do and how to do it. It can do amazing things. I mean, it can interview you for a position. You can go back and forth, and that's what I think really powerful thing is when you tell it to do something and tell it to go back and forth with you on it. I've had it do create your own ending type of stories, and it's really amazing all the different things that it could be used in an economics classroom to provide, obviously quick responses to questions posed to it, like how does specialization increase productivity? Yesterday, we're doing a professional development on April 1st with the Colorado Council, and we're going to be doing economics and music, and we're going to be interviewing a musician. So I just told it to come up with 15 questions that you would ask a musician about the business side of the industry. I was amazed by the questions. I didn't need to touch it. I mean, really, I just pulled those questions out, and we're going to utilize those when we do our professional development. So it's obviously an efficiency tool. I love things that are going to create efficiency, and it's really good at those lists. In that way, I think then we have to be creative in how we utilize this stuff, right? So we could tell ChatGPT, come up with a list of 5 things that could be done to reduce inflation. And then maybe you have the students do a pie graph, things, which ones are you going to utilize, or if you're going to utilize 5, which ones would be the greatest part of the pie graph that would be the most important to help reduce inflation, or 5 ways to improve the labor force participation in the United States. There's a lot of, critical thinking things. But also as a tool for fun, you could paste in the most recent FOMC statement and tell ChatGPT to rewrite the statement in the style of LL Cool J, and it does it. It literally does it like it's a rap. So I think it can really bridge some of the gaps that we have out there. Just one final thing before I hand it off, because I don't want to take too much time right now. We can always come back to me, but if there's a need. But you could put an FOMC statement and ask it if it's hawkish or dovish, and it does. It has accurately every time I've put one in there. Do that. Or you could put in the FOMC statement and say, create a tweet from the statement, or have it create a title for the statement. And then I think that is, okay, you've got all these, maybe you do the last 6 FOMC statements and have it create a title for each of those statements. And then maybe have it tell the story. See, the student would have to connect the dots and maybe tell some of the in-between stuff, the story, the stuff that's not there. So a lot of powerful things that I think it can do. Some of the other tools that we did mess with during our presentation was Midjourney, which is like DALL-E, which is a creation of an image. We had it create the Fed chairman in XR format, which was pretty cool to see what it did with the Fed chairman and XR characters. So I again see the project thing where you could say, okay, create an image of this person, use the voice synthesis to use their voice, and then use ChatGPT to do your research about this person, and maybe it's how they would have handled situations that didn't even happen in their lifetime. Like, how would Dwight D. Eisenhower handle some type of situation that happened after he passed away? I think that's the type of things that could be good to synthesize all these different AI tools that are out there. So I think that's a kind of a general introduction of some things that we've done and have been thinking about with AI. I really want to embrace it as a tool for creativity and for critical thinking, and want to continue, thinking about that and keep that discussion going.
Okay, thank you, Derek. I'm going to now turn to introducing Jadrian Wooten. I mean, we all know him. He's an award-winning educator and researcher. He's currently an associate professor at Virginia Tech and the director of undergraduate studies for the Department of Economics. He is the author of Parks and Recreation and Economics and he has a weekly blog known as Monday Morning Economist, and I love that. Jadrian, do you want to share a little bit about your background in addition to what I described and talk about the research?
Sure. So I would say my background in terms of what you didn't miss is I will say yes to almost any project, which is why my stuff is like all over the board. Whether it's, I think Derek's realized this from when he's asked me stuff. Like my answer is almost always within a day, as the answer is yes. So I am super passionate about anything that has to do with teaching economics, and that's not just teaching economics to students. I think of my job and my position as how I can spread economic knowledge outside of my classroom. And that's part of the either writing newsletters, writing news articles, talking to radio people. Like, I don't care. I'll say yes if it means that more people are going to get to hear about economics. So I think you hit it perfectly. I wouldn't add any more to that. I will say that at least the project that I'll talk about for just a little bit, Derek mentioned it at the very beginning of his talk, his kind of switch on this idea of like, we need to change how we think about ChatGPT. That's why the title of the paper has changed. And so when we put this together, so it was Wayne, Dirk, and Nahil, we kind of came together and just kind of, we did it really, really fast. So this has been an incredibly quick experience for us, where I think we started this paper about a month ago. And we were working on it in different parts. So I was responsible for I got to do the fun part. I got to put everything through ChatGPT and actually see the results of what it spit out and things like that. And when we put it all together, we posted it online. And then within a week, we started to realize that we think we had the wrong tone. The tone that we originally tried to do focused on the fear that people have about ChatGPT as a cheating tool. And rightfully so, people are nervous about it, but we sat down and had the exact same conversation that Derek just kind of summarized in his talk. Students have cheated before and they'll cheat again no matter what. It's really not any different. It's kind of like fighting Wikipedia or fighting calculators. We need to come up with a way to actually teach students to do better. And so a little bit of it, we redirected the paper to really start to try to think about recognizing that, yes, students could cheat with it. And if you're worried about that, this is the chance for you to change how you're teaching, what you're teaching, and try to redo what you're doing if you're concerned about it. Or if you're not concerned about it and you want to teach with it, we're hopeful that there's going to be lots of cool stuff coming out later. So all the stuff that Derek showed is there's so many cool things happening. That's not our space. I'm not that tech savvy. So we're excited for kind of what's happening afterwards. So I'll give you a brief preview if you haven't gotten to look at it. It's I'll give you kind of the two big pictures that come out of the story. We took the TUS, both the micro and the macro TUS exams. So that's the test of understanding college economics that the Center for Economic Education put together a long time ago, but have used over and over and over again. So both the micro and the macro, if you're not familiar with it, have 30 questions on it from a bunch of different topics. The only overlap is I think international trade appears on both of them, but the questions are not the same on both of them. So they both have an international section, but one's an international micro, one's an international macro. So they each have 30 questions, 4 answer choices. It's a multiple choice test. Generally, when it was created, the goal was, did your students learn stuff over the course of a semester? So you give them the test at the beginning, give them 30 questions, give them the same 30 questions later, and see if they got better at it. Or kind of more recently, people have started to figure out you can use this same exam score to see if changing the way you teach is actually beneficial in some way. So essentially, you could see how students normally do over the course of a semester, and then maybe you try to do team-based learning, or you try to do clickers in class, or you try to do group work or some sort of other project, and see if your students move up more than a standard student in just a regular kind of chalk and talk class. So I'll actually share the results with you. I'll just give you kind of the full preview. I don't want to scare you too much with this. If you've never seen the data, it is a little concerning at first. Students don't generally do very well on this test. It's not necessarily a great measure, but generally students get about 50%. Is kind of the easiest way to remember it. And it depends on whether you look at pre-test or post-test. So I have the distributions for you for both of them. The dotted line one with the real big tall part of it, that's the pre-test distribution. So most students on the micro version get around 8 questions right. You'll notice the tail drops off really quickly. There's only 30 questions. Most students don't do very well in the pre-test. The blue one is the post-test, so they move over a little bit. They do tend to learn some stuff after they finish a microeconomics course. We would hope that that's the case. But generally in microeconomics, they get about 12 to 13 questions right. When we put all the answers through ChatGPT, or all the questions through ChatGPT, ChatGPT scored a 19 if we were to mark it by its answers. So it did still miss a lot of questions, but that's at about, if I remember correctly, the 91st percentile for all of the students. So thousands of students have taken it in their sample. Their ChatGPT would be at about the 91st percentile. The micro test was pretty interesting. It does some goofy things, right? It's a program. It's trying to predict the answers. There was one time where it told me all 4 answers were right. A student on a test wouldn't do that. There was one time where, we give it the question and all the answer choices, and it didn't give me any of those answer choices. It gave me a different answer instead. So it did some goofy things that a student wouldn't have done. But generally, it is still better than most of the students who are taking an entire semester's worth of microeconomics. Micro, the score is relatively, I'm going to say low. I always like to think that my students would do better than a 19, but realistically, they'd probably have similar scores to kind of the national average. It does much better on the macro test. Again, pre-test, generally students get about 8 out of the 30 questions right. Students, after they take a semester of principles of macro, generally get about 13, 14 questions right. ChatGPT scored a 26 on the macro exam, which puts it at the 99th percentile. I think that probably says more about the types of questions we ask in micro versus macro, especially when it comes to the TUS exam. The TUS really, it'll ask questions like, calculate the inflation rate with this data. So the TUS does a really good job with it because it's super easy to calculate things. Versus the micro exam, it's much more situational. What if I applied a price ceiling in a particular market? So ChatGPT is trying to estimate lots of extra things that are happening. So those are the general results, but I figured I'd share those with you kind of to see it. It does relatively well. This is ChatGPT 3. So this is the previous one, not the newest one that has come out. And by every indication, the newest one is likely much, 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 much better. And so it'll be really interesting to see how well it does if it were to take this again. But I'm happy to answer questions or share anything that we did if you have any.
Okay, this is great. So we talked about the productivity enhancement aspects of the AI tools. We've moved into, I think, Jadrian, what you're saying is that ChatGPT is better than our students.
I would say better than a lot of them. I mean, we have some great students, right? We have some really good ones. But it's probably going to score better than the average on your test. If you're doing, that was just a multiple choice test. We're curious how it would do on like an AP exam or an open-ended test. My guess is it would probably still do better than my students because my students don't write very well. So it probably would do better than them on that too.
So now this, go ahead, Kate.
I was ready to jump in with questions, but if you have directed questions, Tawni, I don't want to step on you. Go ahead.
This isn't to continue the conversation quickly about experiences in the classroom. So okay. After Derek and Joel's exciting presentation, I came back and charged just to bring it more systematically into my classrooms. And I was grading about 50 macro final exams. Consistently, they were getting the same question wrong, and they were using the same phrasing, and they were citing the textbook, the Courtney textbook in macro. And I thought to myself, it was about the Fed monetary policy and such, and they identified the Fed as the federal government, and they confused a significant group of students, confused the monetary policy with fiscal policy. And the phrasing was so close, I had to go back to the macro book that I've been using for a long time. And I tried, how could they make these connections if they were using the textbook? Well, I put it in my phone, and sure enough, I got an answer about the role of the Fed in monetary policy, and I got a response that was totally incorrect. And so I started doing a little bit more digging, and it's about input and output. And there's a reason that there are no citations here, because it's just grabbing information and it's data driven. Correct me if I'm wrong. And so if systematically we have a lot of people who are inputting information and they turn around, it keeps track of the numbers of copy and such. So if you copy and paste, it's constantly collecting data. I don't know if that's a signal that it's usable or not, but then the student turns around and uses it. And as a professor, in all of my years of teaching, combined with those of the faculty, because we're having informal conversations at the college level about this, it's something that we hadn't really thought about. This is a new technology tool. It's at an early stage. And how do we address this in the classroom and be realistic that there are strengths and there are opportunities, but also there are threats and there are challenges. How do we get our head around it in a fashion that's appropriate for this group of students, this generation of students? Because we've talked about it. I think it was Devin who reached out to me. You have essay contests. How will you know if your essay contest, the entries are written by the students or if it's written by Chat GPT? I don't know. And where do we go with that? Now you're competing, as Jadrian stated and quickly summarized, we're competing not with other people, other students who are at the same level of learning. Now you're competing against an AI bot. And how do we think about it? I don't know. These are questions just to put in the middle of the table. Devin or Adriana, do you have any thoughts? You're shaking your head and.
No, I'm just thinking because we've been preparing for that. So our contest ends March 31st. So we're just kind of excited to see how much of the entries are going to kind of come in and be kind of cookie cutter, kind of coming from ChatGPT. So we'll see. I guess we'll keep you guys posted in the third Thursday of May or or something.
Well, Derek, if Derek, as we experienced in a room full of 100 economic educators, it was difficult for the experts to distinguish between the two.
Well, absolutely. And I think that you're going to see a lot of ChatGPT generated content in those essay contests, right? It's almost like, are we in a post-grading era? Like you want to learn, you're here to learn. You want to cheat and throw stuff in ChatGPT, you can do it, right? I mean, you can't stop it.
Yeah.
So it's more of how you're going to utilize that tool, because it's amazing. You can tell it what voice, you can tell it, okay, here's my email. Can you create a more passive voice? It's just anything you want it to do as far as those things. Now, can it be wrong? Absolutely. What I want to do is I want to catch it doing something wrong. Like Tawni showed me, it was an upward sloping demand curve is what it said, right? Upward sloping demand curve. I would like to tell it, like, are you sure the demand curve is upward sloping? Because I think it would correct itself. I think that the next time, if I said that it would correct itself, because you can go back and forth with it like that.
Okay. Do we have Devin and then Kate?
Sure. Well, I mean, similarly, I think we have a little bit more time until our essay contest wraps up, but I think similarly, we're going to be interested to see if there's repetition in responses. I mean, it's quite open-ended in how students can write their essays. So I think it'll be sort of a test run this time around, but we may see similarities. And I think different from maybe a professor who's marking an essay and is going to be picking out, incorrect pieces of information to correct the student. We may not have as much of that. We'll have, of course, our judges to be picking up those pieces of information. So hopefully they'll be able to flag some of that for us. But I think really this time around, since it's so new to us, it's mostly going to be a test run. But any feedback that any of you pick up along the way, we're just so interested to know those details. It's extremely informative for us. So we appreciate these kinds of sessions for that exact reason.
Okay, get into the camera.
Sure. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, so this has been absolutely fascinating because I actually took like a 1-hour webinar on ChatGPT not terribly long ago. I've been using it all semester to write questions for exams and to generate like sample essays for students to evaluate and things like that. It is funny when it generates information that is wrong. Last night I was asking it for histories of various retailers, and it screwed up some stuff. So you're right. It's obviously not perfect. I've used so with a student essay assignment recently, I used a handful of different like AI detectors to see, are these written by AI? Because like when a student who's failed everything is suddenly like the world's leading authority on the signaling model of education, that's a little suspicious. And I was a little bit uncomfortable with the number of type 1 and type 2 errors. So for example, like I generated an essay in ChatGPT, then plugged it into one of these detectors, and it said, yeah, it's 100% AI. Then the next one's like, there's absolutely no chance this was written by AI. So that's definitely something I think we're going to have to deal with, and something we're going to have to sharpen. And I definitely appreciate everybody's. I've really enjoyed listening to this conversation.
Yeah, thank you,
Sure.
Kate.
Yeah, so that's very interesting, Art. Thanks. And Adriana and Devin, when you guys get your essay, please come back and tell us what you learned. That would be great. So I wanted to just contribute this way. When I found out about ChatGPT, I started to use it to make up my test questions, because it's a great, but I can also take those questions. So that's, so it was really useful for me, because, sometimes you get writer's block. It wasn't really good at generating questions with graphs. So that, is still something that we can do on our own. The thing I did in my class is I did away with any kind of written homework, because I taught, 300 at a time. And, and I have help grading, but why just do that, and put the TAs through that? So what I did instead is I offered a practice problem set. So 0 incentive to cheat on that, right? Because they're only going to get feedback on what they put into it, right? And then I had a graded practice set attached to the quiz. So it would be questions that were easy to grade, but it would be in a proctored environment. But if they had done the practice, that would help them with those questions. So basically I disentangled the incentive to cheat from the learning experience. So that helped a lot. So now the class is like 90% proctored. And it turns out they're learning better, because the only people who do those practice problem sets are the ones who want feedback, and they're getting it. And then the professor can say, because right now I'm not teaching, so the TAs are teaching, and they love it because there's less grading, but they are also only giving feedback to the people who actually want it, so it's not like drudgery, so that's a very positive thing, I think. And I wouldn't have done that. I wouldn't have innovated that way if I wasn't like freaked out about ChatGPT, taking over part of the class. And the last thing I wanted to contribute is we're going to launch a fellowship for about 40 students a year. And if they stay in West Virginia for 2 years and contribute to the economy, they get a $20,000 performance bonus, right? This is a big deal. And we had set it up in the fall. We haven't recruited anyone yet, but we had set it up till we wanted a costly signal to these students, to get these students in, because we don't care what they know. We don't want to give them an econ test. We don't want to test them. We just want people who are, a lot of raw material that are good, and they're willing to stick it out. So what we wanted was a costly signal for them, and we were going to have them read a book. So that's why I was asking about bulk prices, because they could read, for instance, they could read your book. They'd be asked to, write an essay on it. But we didn't want to read a bunch of ChatGPT essays, and we didn't want to have 400 applications. So now what we're going to do is just say, come to an information session. That's possible. And it's going to be a hard program. So we're going to sell it the way it is. But then we're going to say, put your name in the hat, and we're going to randomly draw. We're just going to randomly draw, and that's going to help us compare, we have a nice comparison group, because it's random now to the people who get in, and we can still incentivize the non-treatment group with, but this random assignment, it's, it's kind of the best way to do it from a sciencey point of view, but I wouldn't have done it if I wasn't, if it just didn't make the essay type part of the application useless to us and not be a signal of cost, right? Because some kids will try, but why put them in the same pot with people who are using ChatGPT? So anyway, that's just the points. Yeah.
Okay, do we have any other comments? Strategies? Well, expect something from a group of us, because I do want to think about AI in the classroom, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I'm very interested in research. And to let you know, we are updating our ethical guidelines at the college level, and we're hoping that the university will also think about bringing them into the fold at their level. And one thing that caught my attention, Kate, is when you talked about the proctoring piece. I know that in online classes, it's going to be more important for us to have that face-to-face interaction where we can guarantee that the person taking the exam is actually the individual enrolled in the class, and they're using it in theory without the assistance of technology, if we're interested in testing their individual knowledge. So with that, everyone, you will see Kate at API in Cancun. I'm going to be in Germany leading the Liberty Fund. I'm sorry, but Cancun, Germany, I couldn't. Yeah, it was an easy decision. Anyhow.
I'll represent you well.
I know you will, and I'm sure all of you will have a toast. So if you're going to API, reach out to Kate, have a drink. The next time we meet will be May 18th. We're hoping to send out some readings that all of you will do. We will bring in an author. We're trying to get permission to share a chapter of her book. And yeah, keep doing what you're doing, and know that we all appreciate you. This is Tawni and Cate signing off for Third Thursday, Marketplace of Ideas. Until next time, enjoy life. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Jadrian, I know that, what was it? Wayne was going to try to be in, but let's circle back when Dirk is available. Is that okay?
Yeah, no, that's not a problem.
Yeah, and then we'll go through, because I'm really interested in this whole discussion about what it means in our classroom and how do we respond given the opportunities, but also the threats.
Yeah, no, I think so I did what Kate said. I did that right before the pandemic in one of my classes. I just cut out all the graded homework, because so many of them were cheating off of Chegg and Course Hero. And I said, screw it, now they're just practice problems. And I think what's going to end up happening is we're moving away from graded homework, graded activities at home. And where I'm worried is it's going to put more weight on the exams. And so what I found in my class, whenever I took away the graded homework, I got exactly what Kate said. I got way better grades on my stuff, but I also got a lot more way worse grades. So my students sort of did this split where the ones who cared did it and worked on it and got better. And the ones who never cared to begin with never looked at it and just took a veer to the other side.
So one thing we're doing, Jadrian, is I agree with you. So I have, I teach at WVU, right? We don't have admission standards, right?
Yeah.
So we have this bottom, especially in econ, because it's like a STEM class, so it's tough. But what happened is, for us this semester, I've been watching it, and the C students have lifted up a little bit.
Yeah.
And I call them the ghost, like the ghosts are still ghosts, but still. But what I did is I explicitly call the practice problem set, and then I call it a graded problem set. And it's each one's only worth 3%. We have 6 of them.
Yeah.
But it's a second, it's actually I know this sounds silly, but it's a second piece. And it's the same material that's on the quiz, but they know to do, it's the little carrot attached to that assignment. It's the weirdest thing. It's just drawing that dotted line, like from this to that. So, and they've started to figure it out. So even if they don't do it, they find someone who has done it and gotten feedback.
I think Dirk and Wayne will have good idea. I think it's just a matter of time. Right. Like even Derek's stuff is a lot of that was, here's some cool ways you can show them things AI is doing, but it's still not an assignment. It's still not something for them to do yet. So I'm excited to see kind of what's coming in the next few months.
So
Yeah.
can I just say one more thing? So Jadrian, one thing I do with my assignment is I have unique numbers. So everyone has a different set of numbers, like everybody. It's like based on their birthday or whatever. And they can find someone else's work, but that person has to explain it to them.
Yeah.
Instead of, I don't know if you do that too, but it's just helps.
Well, guys, what is it? Art and I have to go to our next talk or next event. So we appreciate everything and love you both, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Nice to meet you, Jadrian.
See you. There we go.